Good morning, everyone. Good to see you, Debbie and Jens. And always good to see you, Bante Sudaso, who has been tirelessly teaching every day, multiple times a day sometimes, since the start of the pandemic. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. This morning, Bante will go through the second part of the Sabbāsava Sutta. And you can find the link at the top of the live chat. So if you want to see the text, you can find it there. And good to see you, Danny, Juni, Rupa, Cam, Kyle. Great, Sadhu. It's wonderful to see you every day. And Michelle, hello, Amy. Wonderful. And there's also Stan today behind the scenes. So if you hear any weird noises, that's the kitty getting very excited about Sutta study. He might do one of his cameo appearances as well. Good morning, Sally. And good morning, Elaine. All right. So without further ado, we can go and study the Sutta. Thank you, Bante.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good morning, friends, and welcome to yet another episode of Monk Reality Television. On this occasion, it happens to be something relatively inspiring, which is Sutta study. And yesterday morning, we went through the first half of the Sabbāsava Sutta, the discourse on all the corruptions and how to overcome them. And we finished the first section, which is the section on corruptions to be abandoned by seeing. So next we'll be starting on the second section, and all the other sections are much shorter. It's just the first one that's a bit on the long side. So the second one, corruptions to be abandoned by restraint. So the Buddha says, and monks, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by restraint? Here, monks, from a basis of wise consideration, a monk abides with the eye faculty restrained. Because, monks, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who abides with the eye faculty unrestrained. And those corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who abides with the eye faculty restrained. Then he says the same for abiding with the ear faculty, nose faculty, tongue faculty, body faculty, and mind faculty restrained. So this is going through the six senses. So eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, the six ways through which we perceive things, through which we become aware of experiences. And when we talk about sense restraint in Buddhism, I was surprised a few years back to learn that for some people this brings up a very negative connotation. The word restraint in particular seems to really annoy some people. And sense restraint, also there seems to be some misunderstanding or confusion about what this means. So restraint of the eye faculty, it doesn't mean that you don't see things or that you don't look at things, but rather that you closely watch your mind. When you notice that your gaze is lingering on something, look at your mind. Why? Why are we taking extra time to look at something in particular? And usually it has something to do with our defilements. It has something to do with desire or aversion or delusion. So a standard example of this is somebody who you find attractive is in your field of view. And you might find that you look at them more than you look at the other people, or you look at them more than you look at other things in the room. You might find that your attention, your eyes, tend to linger on that particular person. So this is coming from a place of defilement, namely a place of lust, desire. And also, the more we allow our eyes to linger on that person, then the more that lust and desire and obsession tends to grow. So that is an example of dwelling with the eye faculty unrestrained, as the Buddha says. So we're not controlling ourselves in terms of how we're using our senses. We're allowing our defilements to determine where we direct most of our attention, and we direct our attention in ways that increases our defilements. So this is similar to what the Buddha was saying in the previous section. Any activity, anything which, when you pay attention to it, causes your corruptions to increase, well, that's something that we should not be focusing on. We should not be focusing on anything which causes our corruptions to grow. So it's something that we need to watch out for. So in that case, the best thing to do actually is to look away. Or try to divide your attention equally among all the people in the room. So not just fixating all your attention on the person who you find attractive. Or the ear faculty. So for example, during meditation practice, you might hear a particular sound that really annoys you. Maybe the sound of a ticking clock, or the sound of a woodpecker, or the sound of children playing outside, or whatever it is. And so what we tend to do is that then we tend to focus our attention on those sounds that we dislike. So once again, that's coming from our defilements, that unnecessary fixation on particular sounds. It's coming from our defilements, and it also feeds and builds up our defilements. So that's another example of dwelling with the sense faculties unrestrained. And the Buddha says that when one dwells with one's senses unrestrained in this way, then one's corruptions, disturbances, and fevers arise, or if they're already arisen, they become stronger. So the word corruption, so asava, we already spoke about a fair bit yesterday. So the other two words that are introduced here are vigata, which is translated here as disturbance. Vigata also has the sense of destruction. So it's things which destroy our peace of mind, things which destroy our serenity, which destroy our equanimity. And the other word here is parilaha, which is translated here as fever. So parilaha literally means completely burning, something that's on fire, immolated, something that's completely immolated. And the experience that this is pointing to is what it feels like when the mind is completely burning up with defilements. So again, noticing what it feels like when you're really obsessed with something, when you're really fixated on your intense craving for something, your intense aversion to something. What does that feel like? Well, it feels kind of like your mind is on fire. It feels kind of like your head is burning. It feels kind of like you have a fever, actually. So it's this very unpleasant, intense, burning sensation throughout the mind. So that's what the Buddha is referring to here by parilaha, by fever. And again, it's directly connected to our defilements. The stronger our lust and aversion are, the more we feel like we're burning up from the inside out. The more we feel like our peace of mind is being destroyed, is being disturbed, is being damaged, wiped away. So this is a really important element, especially of monastic practice. But actually, again, the practices which are relevant to monastics are actually relevant to anybody who wants to attain awakening. So regardless of whether you're a monastic or not, this is something that we really need to watch out for. How are we directing our attention to our senses? How are we using our attention in the sensory domain? Do we allow our defilements to pull our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind in unhelpful directions? Do we linger on sensory objects that strengthen and build up our defilements? And if so, then we should make a conscious effort to restrain ourselves, to direct our attention elsewhere, to not give undue attention to things that burn the mind. So this doesn't mean ignoring or blanking out those sensations, but rather it means not giving them any extra attention. So the optimal thing is to give equal attention to everything that arises, because then we're not acting from a place of partiality or preference at all. But often when we're still in the grip of strong defilements, it's very difficult to go directly to impartiality. So in that case, then we might apply the opposite for a little while. So coming back to the case of the attractive person in the room who you keep staring at, well, then for a period of time, look at anybody else in the room except that person. For a period of time, intentionally don't look at that person at all, to try to break that pattern in your mind, to try to wear it away by cultivating the opposite. Then when you think you're ready, then you can give that person equal attention. But in the beginning, sometimes it's helpful to intentionally pull your attention away from whatever is related to one's defilements. That's a bit on sense restraint. So then the Buddha summarizes. He says, monks, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who abides unrestrained. And those corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who abides restrained. Monks, these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by restraint. So there he's just emphasizing once again that when we practice with our senses in this way, then our mind is not corrupted, it's not disturbed. There's none of that internal burning discomfort that normally accompanies defilements, and normally accompanies desire and aversion. Then he goes into the next section, corruptions to be abandoned by using. So the word using is patisevana, so making use of something. And lost my place in the Sutta. There we go. Yeah, so patisevana. Yeah, it means using, engaging in, making use of. And this is a section talking about the four requisites, the four basic requirements that one needs. So commonly this is called chatupachaya, the four supports for life. And once again, this is particularly used in a monastic context, but it still provides useful reflections for anyone who's interested in sincerely developing the Buddhist path. Basically, in case you haven't gotten it by now, if you want to attain enlightenment, become a monastic. If you don't want to become a monastic, well, that's going to be a problem. But at least try to live as much like a monastic as you can while being a lay person. Because then you'll still be developing all of these wonderful qualities which lead directly towards enlightenment. And if you're not willing to incorporate elements of monastic practice into your daily life, then have a closer look at that. Why? why are you resistant to Buddhist practice? Why are you resistant to cultivating the very things the Buddha said to cultivate? Why are you resistant to the things that lead to awakening? Have a closer look at it. Anyway, so Patisevanapahātabha, so the corruptions to be abandoned by using. So the Buddha says, monks, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by using? Here, monks, from a basis of wise consideration, a monk uses a robe only for the sake of fending off cold, fending off heat, fending off contact with flies, mosquitoes, wind, sunburn, and reptiles, only for the sake of modesty. So this is the first of the four supports, the four basic requirements that one needs in order to survive, in order to get by as a human being. So clothing. So in monastic life, of course, we talk about robes because we wear robes. But the general meaning here is clothing. Why do we have clothes? Why do we use clothes? Well, we use it for these basic reasons. We're fending off cold. So when it's cold, like today, it's a bit cold here at the monastery. So we wear clothing to keep us warm, to protect us from the cold, and fending off heat. So, for example, keeping the sun off of your skin when you go outside, or wearing a sun hat to keep the sun from burning you. Fending off contact with flies, mosquitoes, wind, sunburn, and reptiles. Again, protecting your body from insects and from the elements, from the outside world. So keeping the body healthy. Because if we allow the body to get too cold or too hot or to be attacked by insects and reptiles, if we allow it to be sunburned, well, for one thing, that's not good for your health, but also that tends to provoke our defilements. So when we're really cold, then we tend to just fixate on how much we hate being cold, how much we want to be warm. And if you're really cold, then you might find that your mind starts to blank out. You might find that your mind starts to go numb. So this has been my experience. So I've had a number of times when I had to meditate outside when it was freezing cold. And what I found is my mind would just go to sleep within a very short period of time. My mind would just switch off because that was the only way it could escape the suffering of being cold. This was many, many years ago when my practice was much less developed than it is these days. So these days I can tolerate cold a little bit better. Similarly with fending off heat. Also, when we're too hot, then that also can lead to drowsiness or dullness of mind. And also there can be this fixation on how much we hate being hot and the desire for cooling off. So of course, eventually we need to develop equanimity towards both cold and heat. But when we're not yet to that point, we also need to be aware of our limits and to try not to do things which will intentionally stir up our defilements. So this is something that we need to be careful of in our practice, though, is that we also need to be careful not to use this as an excuse to avoid any circumstance which is going to develop our practice. Because then some people say things like, oh, well, I don't like the feeling of being hungry, so I'm not going to follow the 8 precepts. I'm just going to eat whenever I want, as much as I want. Like, well, that's kind of missing the point. You still have an opportunity to practice restraint. There's nothing bad with facing the feeling of hunger and learning how to be okay with it. But we do also need to be realistic with ourselves. What is spurring our defilements? What is coming from a place of defilement? And finally, we wear clothing for the sake of modesty. So the Pali word here literally says covering your private parts. So this is translated a bit more simply as modesty. And this is particularly relevant, by the way, in the Indian religious environment, because At that time in ancient India, and I think even to this day, uh, there are some mm, ascetics and contemplatives outside of Buddhism who go around naked or who go around wearing just a loincloth, so just barely covering their private parts. You've seen this. You've been to India. Yeah. And the Buddhist order, we're much more covered up. We cover up most of our body. And again, it's this practice of modesty, this practice of covering up the body, because again, we've made this commitment to developing a pure mind, a celibate mind, a mind which is free of desire and aversion. And also it's representing that we're not about the body. So when you look at a Buddhist monastic, most of what you see is the robe. And the robe represents the Buddhist path. It represents the practices that the Buddha gave to us, the practices that the Buddha taught. The next one, this one says, from a basis of wise consideration, he uses alms food, not for fun, not for intoxication, not for adornment, not for beautification, only for the stability and continuance of this body, for avoiding physical harm, for supporting the spiritual life. Thinking, I will remove old feelings and I will not produce new feelings. In this way, I will be blameless and comfortable. So we do this chant every day before eating lunch at the monastery. And this is reflecting on food. Again, why do we use food? Well, I mean, realistically, most of us use food because it's fun and it's pleasant and it tastes good and it makes us feel pleasant afterwards. But that's not the reason for food. The reason for food is to keep us alive and healthy so that we can continue doing our spiritual practice. So this is the reflection that we make before eating, is reminding ourselves that food is not just meant to be a form of entertainment or a form of distraction, but rather it's something that's just meant to keep us alive and healthy so that we can continue doing our practice. And one thing that I should emphasize here is that the Buddha does speak about using food to make your body healthy. So here it's translated as avoiding physical harm. So the Pali is vihingsu paratya, but that's also translated as for the sake of one's health, for the sake of being healthy. So this is another important thing. So for example, in monasteries, often one is given a variety of different foods, some of which are good for you and some of which are not, some of which are healthy and some of which are not healthy. So it's not the case at this monastery. At this monastery, the food is pretty much always very healthy. But at many monasteries, you'll have a variety of options, some of which are good for you and some of which are not, some of which are healthy and some we know are not healthy, which we know are not going to sustain and nourish our body. Then we're not following the Buddha's instructions on food. So we should take the time and effort to really consider, what am I eating? Is it good for my health or bad for my health? Is it supporting mindfulness and clarity of mind? Or is it leading to dullness of mind? Is it contributing to good physical health, to the stability of the body? Or is it leading to a lot of physical problems and disturbances? So we do need to consider these things. So one of the problems that has cropped up, especially in the last few decades, in Buddhist monastic communities, is a tendency towards diabetes and obesity. And that comes from eating a lot of junk food. And you might think, well, why would they be eating a lot of junk food? And the answer is because people give them a lot of junk food. And there's often this prevailing idea that we should just eat whatever people give us. But that's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha did not say that we should just eat whatever people give us. He said we should eat for the sake of avoiding physical harm, to keep the body stable and healthy. That's very different from saying eat whatever people give you. So we do need to take some time and effort to consider what's actually healthy for our body and supportive for our practice, but also without falling into the trap of fixating on what's pleasant to eat, what's fun to eat, what's enjoyable to eat. And these don't need to be in conflict. Anyone who's been to Italy knows that food can be both pleasant and also healthy. And anyone who's lived in the US knows that food can be both pleasant and unhealthy. So clearly, these qualities are not directly related to each other. You can have healthy food that's enjoyable, and you can have unhealthy food that's enjoyable. So making an effort to actually really take this on, trying to use food in a way that supports your health and your practice. Another important reason for this, by the way, because then some people will say, oh, we shouldn't be obsessed with the body because we are not the body. The body is not who we are. We shouldn't be getting all wrapped up in it. And that's true. However, a long life with a healthy body gives you lots of opportunity to practice. A short life with an unhealthy body gives you lots of problems and obstacles in your practice. That's not so good. So I remember a while back I was talking with this really lovely monk from Taiwan. And somehow we got on the subject of seatbelts in cars. I don't know how we got on that topic. It's not a topic I normally discuss with monks. I normally talk about Dharma. But somehow we got on the topic of seatbelts. And he said, it is our obligation to wear seatbelts. I was like, what? He said, it's part of the Bodhisattva practice to wear seatbelts. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, because we have to make sure we're alive and healthy for as long as possible so that we can practice for the benefit of others. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Of course, we need to look after our own health, not just for our own sake, but also for the benefit of others. So that same reflection applies to eating. We should try to eat in a way which supports the health of our body, not just for our own sake, but also for the benefit of others. So, the next one. From a basis of wise consideration, one uses sleeping and sitting places only for the sake of fending off cold, fending off heat, fending off contact with flies, mosquitoes, wind, sunburn, and reptiles, only for the sake of removing the danger of seasonal weather, and for the purpose of retreat. So this is talking about dwelling places. When a monk gets ordained, we're told the basic minimum for these four things. And the basic minimum for a dwelling place is the base of a tree. So sitting and sleeping at the base of a tree. Most of us have quite a bit more than that. So again, often there tends to be this obsession with wanting a better dwelling place or wanting a nicer place or bigger place. But instead, we should be asking ourselves, does it fulfill this basic purpose? Does it keep me warm in the winter, cool in the summer? Does it keep the mosquitoes out? Does it keep the wind out? Does it serve this basic purpose of protecting me from the weather? And finally, is it supportive to retreat? Patisalana in Pāli. Does it help me to get conditions which help my meditation practice? So here, this building, it protects us a little bit from the noise of the outside world. It protects us a little bit from intrusion, so that we can focus on doing our practice without needing to worry about anything. So these are the considerations to use. Is our dwelling place fulfilling these basic purposes? And if it's not living up to this minimum, then that can be a basis which fuels our defilements. And if it is living up to this minimum, then craving something more or something better will just be feeding our defilements. So looking at that, what's our relationship to our dwelling place? Then the final one, from a basis of wise consideration, one uses supports for the ill and medicinal supplies only for the sake of fending off oppressive feelings that have arisen for the utmost freedom from affliction. So we are in fact allowed to use medicine. That's perfectly fine. So we use medicines and medical equipment and so on, again, for the sake of keeping us healthy. Again, here the Buddha is talking about keeping our bodies healthy. So it's not a matter of vanity, but it's a very practical thing of recognizing that it's easier to practice when we're healthy. And we live longer, which gives us more time to practice. So this is an important consideration, is considering how can we keep our bodies healthy, but without obsessing about it, without getting all wrapped up in it. Do we have enough to get by? Well, that's okay. It's fine. We don't need to crave anything special or anything extra as long as we've got enough to get by. And then the Buddha says, monks, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who does not use these things in this way, and corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who uses these things in this way. Monks, these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by using. In other words, as long as we're getting our basic needs met in these four areas, so clothing, food, dwelling, and medicine, as long as we're getting our basic needs met, and we're not craving anything extra, then it won't be a problem for us. It won't contribute to the arising of defilements. Then the next section, corruptions to be abandoned by enduring. And this one makes a nice counterpoint to the previous one, by the way. The Buddha says, monks, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by enduring? Here, monks, from a basis of wise consideration, a monk is tolerant of cold, heat, hunger, and thirst, of contact with flies, mosquitoes, wind, sunburn, and reptiles, of ill-spoken, unwelcome statements, of arisen bodily sensations that are painful, sharp, rough, bitter, disagreeable, unpleasant, and life-threatening. He is one who endures such things. Monks, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who does not endure such things, and corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who endures such things. Monks, these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by enduring. So, although we try to use clothing, food, dwelling places, and medicine to try to fend off cold, heat, hunger, thirst, insects, and so on, nonetheless, from time to time, we will still have to face those conditions. And when we do, then we endure them with a tolerant mind, a peaceful mind, an undisturbed mind, an unbothered mind. So instead of sitting here going, it's so cold, I hate this, instead it's like, oh, this is what cold feels like. Okay. I can put up with this. It's all right. I can endure. I can live with it. So the word adivasana, which is translated here as enduring, it comes from the verb vasati, which means to live. So adivasana is like, I can live with this. I can endure this. He also mentions tolerating ill-spoken, unwelcome statements. So when people say things that we don't like, when people say things that are rude or harsh or unfair or cruel, we're not bothered. We tolerate it. We endure it. It's like, yeah, that's what's going on. Okay. There's actually a really interesting practice that you can do. If somebody is saying harsh or mean things to you, unkind things, things that you dislike, and you find you have a strong urge to react, to respond, maybe to argue with them or talk back to them. Instead, just listen attentively. Keep your eyes on the person with a gentle gaze, gentle, loving gaze. Maybe a slight smile on your face. Bring up a mind of love and kindness. And just patiently wait while they talk. And just let them keep going. Talk as long as they want, saying whatever they want. Just let them keep going. Don't take it personally. But just stay there with a peaceful, loving mind. And you'll notice that eventually they start running out of steam. Eventually they start softening up. And eventually they'll stop. Then when they stop, you can say something kind and sweet, which is completely unrelated to what that person was just saying. And this has a way of completely derailing the unpleasantness of the conversation. In fact, it tends to really surprise people, catches them off guard. Because usually when somebody is throwing harassment at you, they're expecting you to respond in similar form. They're expecting you to respond with some kind of anger or hostility. So instead, when you respond with kindness, when you respond with gentleness, it has a tendency to break that person out of their aversive state of mind, to shock them out of that defilement. So not only are you protecting your own mind when you tolerate unpleasant words, but you also are helping the other person start to break out of their own defiled pattern. And the Buddha also speaks about enduring painful bodily sensations. So this is a very important thing that we need to come to grips with at some point or another. What is pain? How can we learn to be okay with it? And the way you learn to be okay with it is by peacefully, attentively enduring it. So long periods of meditation are great for this. Long periods of sitting meditation, where you just hold completely still, and whatever sensations come up, we are aware of them without liking or disliking. And eventually you'll start to get incredibly painful sensations arising. And if you can practice awareness without reactivity, without reaction, then your relationship to pain will change. And it will stop hurting. It will stop bothering you. And the Buddha says we should do this even with sensations that feel life-threatening. The Pali word here is panaharana. So panahara means things which destroy life, which harm life. So even things which feel like it's killing you, can we endure it with attentiveness and patience? And we can. But it helps if we've been cultivating that patient endurance of sensations with much more subtle, mild forms of pain first. So then the next section, now that we've talked about things to endure, now the Buddha talks about things to avoid. Some of us like to go immediately to this section, but actually keeping in mind that every section here is meant to be taken in the context of all the other sections. So then the Buddha says, monks, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by avoiding? Here, monks, from a basis of wise consideration, a monk avoids a wild elephant, a wild horse, a wild ox, a wild dog, a snake, a stump, a thorn bush, a pit, a precipice, a cesspool, a sewer. So those are all dangerous places, dangerous conditions. So wild elephants, horses, oxes, dogs, and snakes, these are all things which might injure you or kill you, which would be an obstacle to your practice. So we try to avoid life-threatening situations. So a stump. So to relate to this one, keep in mind that at that time, people would walk around barefoot for the most part. They'd be either barefoot or wearing sandals. And this was before the age of lawnmowers. So there would often be tall grass everywhere. So you might be walking through the grass and not see a stump until you slam your foot into it. And you can quite badly injure your foot if you're not paying attention in those situations. Or you might stumble and fall. So watching out, watch where you're walking, watch where you're going. Make sure that you don't injure your body. Similarly with a thorn bush, a pit, a precipice, a cesspool or sewer, these are all circumstances under which, if we're not careful, we can cause serious harm to our body. And once again, it's not particularly good for our practice to have an injured body, to have a crippled body. It can be quite disruptive. Of course, if that's what you already have, then you make the best you can with it. You still practice as best you can, even if your body's not in perfect condition. But try to avoid damaging your health. Try to avoid damaging your body unnecessarily. Then the Buddha goes on, there are unsuitable seats that one might sit in, there are unsuitable locations that one might wander in, and there are bad friends that one might associate with, such that one's wise co-practitioners might suspect one of bad conduct. From a basis of wise consideration, one avoids these kinds of unsuitable seats, unsuitable locations, and bad friends. So in other words, not going to places where you will be tempted to engage in unwholesome activities, or places where harmful things might happen to you, and not associating with people who are immoral, who are unwise, people who are not living a spiritual life. Try to avoid associating with people who are bad influences. And also because, as the Buddha mentions here, if you engage in these things, if you spend your time sitting in nightclubs and wandering through the red light district in the middle of the night and hanging out with immoral people, then other spiritual practitioners are going to have suspicions about you. They're going to start to suspect that maybe your conduct is not so good. And therefore, they'll be less likely to trust you. They'll be less likely to want to be around you. They'll be less likely to be a source of benefit to you then. They'll be less likely to help you out in your practice because they won't trust you. So we need to watch out for that. We need to watch out not just for situations which directly harm us or directly tempt us, but also watching out for engaging in behaviors which make other practitioners suspicious of us, which make them doubt our sincerity. Then the Buddha wraps up, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who does not avoid such things, and corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who avoids such things. Monks, these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by avoiding. Then the next section, monks, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by removing? Here, monks, from a basis of wise consideration. A monk does not tolerate an arisen sensual thought. He abandons it, removes it, destroys it, annihilates it. He does not tolerate an arisen aversive thought, a cruel thought, or any kind of harmful, unwholesome mind state. He abandons it, removes it, destroys it, annihilates it. So this is very strong language that the Buddha is using here. But it's very important because when we notice that we're thinking any kind of unwholesome thought, that should be an alarm going off in our mind. That should give us extreme pause. Like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Am I actually intentionally cultivating sensual thoughts, aversive thoughts, cruel thoughts, harmful thoughts? Am I actually doing that? I should stop right away. I should destroy these thoughts. I should remove them from the mind. I should eliminate them immediately. So when those situations come up, then you use whatever methods you've developed through your meditation practice, whatever methods you've developed as a way of pulling the mind out of those harmful patterns, and establishing the mind in what's wholesome. So this is really important. So some people, they say, oh, it's just whatever's in the mind. And it's like, well, that's true. And if it's unwholesome, we should stop. You don't tolerate it. So you tolerate cold, heat, hunger, thirst, mosquitoes, and so on, but you do not tolerate cruel thoughts, sensual thoughts, harmful thoughts. He says, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who does not remove such things, and corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who removes such things. Amongst these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by removing. Then he says, monks, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by developing? Here, monks, from a basis of wise consideration, a monk develops the mindfulness enlightenment factor, which is dependent upon seclusion, dependent upon dispassion, dependent upon cessation, and matures in relinquishment. And the same for the investigation of phenomena, the energy, the rapture, the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity enlightenment factors. So these are the 7 bojjhangas, the 7 factors of awakening. And I just spoke about these a few days ago, so I'm not going to go over them in detail at this time. What I will emphasize is that for each one of these, the Buddha says that they are dependent upon seclusion, upon dispassion, and upon cessation, and they mature in relinquishment. So dependent upon seclusion. So seclusion is used in a few ways in the suttas. One way is it means to seclude oneself from unwholesome states of mind. So this follows directly upon the previous section. The previous section was on removing unwholesome thoughts and tendencies from the mind. So that's secluding oneself from unwholesome mind states. There's also physical seclusion, which is something that we do when we go on meditation retreat, for example. We seclude ourselves physically from the distractions and busyness of the world, of everyday life. And there's also mental seclusion, which is even when we're in the midst of activities and groups and crowds, we keep our mind from getting wrapped up in those things. We always keep a sense of self-containment about the mind. So not getting immersed into the activities and the busyness and the drama, but always keeping one step apart from all of it. Even as we're in the middle of it, there's always that feeling of being alone in our own mind. And the 7 enlightenment factors, it says, they mature in relinquishment. So relinquishment, vosagga. First off, I should finish the other 2. So dependent upon dispassion. Dispassion is viraga. So viraga is literally, it means without lust, without passion. So this is one of the major qualities that we're developing in Buddhism. So dispassion is the mind which is very peaceful and content, because it's not craving anything, it's not lusting after anything, it's not obsessed with anything. Therefore, it's very peaceful and content. Dependent upon cessation, so the cessation of unwholesome mind states, the cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion. Cessation, dependent upon cessation can also mean dependent upon awareness of the cessation of phenomena. So then dependent upon the recognition of impermanence, that all things cease, all things end, moment after moment. And finally, it matures in relinquishment. So these enlightenment factors, they culminate in letting go of all things. They culminate in the willingness to let go of all things, which is the direct condition for full awakening. And the Buddha says, monks, corruptions, disturbances, and fevers may arise for one who does not develop such things, and corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who develops such things. Monks, these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by developing. And then he wraps up. He says, monks, when there is a monk for whom the corruptions to be abandoned by seeing have been abandoned by seeing, And the same for the ones to be abandoned by restraint, by using, by enduring, by avoiding, by removing, and by developing. Monks, this is called a monk who abides restrained by the restraint of all the corruptions, who has cut off craving, who has severed the fetter, and by means of the appropriate penetration of conceit has made an end of suffering. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, those monks delighted in the Blessed One's speech. In other words, the Buddha is saying here that if we practice these ways of restraining our corruptions, of cutting off our corruptions, of preventing ourselves from worsening our corruptions while gradually wearing them away, then we can attain full awakening. This is a complete set of practices which covers a variety of different circumstances and conditions to help us use whatever situation we're in as a path towards awakening. So that's the end of this sutta. So at this time, I'd like to go into Q&A. So if you have any questions, please type them into the live chat and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you so much, Bhante, for going through with us this sutta. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And welcome to some other friends. We have a very international crowd this morning. So Ella from Poland, Galaxy from Malaysia, and Alicia from Southern Spain. Great, good to see you all. And Key from Australia representing. Great, good to see you all. Hi, Andy. Hi, Catalina. Jale, yay, good to see you. And Yudi, Suzanne, and Yanni, also awesome. All right, so Sally is asking, could Bhante explain more about corruptions, disturbances, and fevers do not arise for one who abides with the mind faculty restrained? Especially, how do you restrain the mind faculty?
Yeah, so that's, again, like when you're sitting in meditation and a thought appears in the mind and you really want to keep thinking those thoughts, you really want to pursue that line of thought, and you don't. Because you know that if you get wrapped up in those thoughts, then that's just going to build up your defilements. Or it's just going to strengthen your tendency towards sensuality or towards aversion or towards confusion or your obsession with states of existence. So you just let it drop. That's abiding with the mind faculty restrained.
And Boon is asking, hi, could Bhante explain if wanting to keep pet also is kind of our defilement?
Well, I mean, that's definitely defilement right there. So it really depends. It depends upon your attitude. So if your attitude is, for example, to save an animal, which is otherwise going to be killed. So that's the case of all the animals that live here at the monastery. So here at the monastery, there's 4 animals living here. And they were all animals which were going to be killed. So we gave them a home so that they would have a place where they could live a happy, relatively normal life without any fear of being injured or killed unnecessarily, and with people who look after them and take care of them and who care about them. So that's a wholesome thing to do within your limits. So some people take this too far and they try to adopt every cat from the shelters, and then they wind up with more than they can actually look after. So that's going too far. So know your limits. What I would say though is do not buy pets from pet stores. Do not buy pets from pet breeders. Rather, adopt a pet from death row, as they say. Like adopt an animal that otherwise would be killed. So then you're saving a living being. Whereas if you buy a pet from a pet store or a pet breeder, then you are contributing to the suffering of animals. You're not reducing it, you're contributing to it. Whereas if you adopt an animal that would otherwise be killed, then you're reducing the suffering of living beings. So be careful there. So some people, they go out and they buy pets from the store thinking that they're freeing them or giving them a good life or something. And that's true to a limited degree, but you're also feeding an industry which causes untold amounts of suffering. That's not the way. Adopt an animal that would otherwise be killed. That's the right way. And use it as an opportunity to develop compassion, to develop kindness, to develop consideration for another sentient being. Then it's wholesome. But also watch to see if you are building up defilements of attachment, defilements of obsession. See what's going on in your mind. So try to use it as a way to develop wholesome mind states, and then it can be quite a good thing. Okay, next question.
And Kam is saying, Bhante, this sounds overwhelmingly challenging. How many lives will it take?
One. This one.
Sadhu. And Sally says, may I ask, he avoids those kinds of unsuitable seats, unsuitable locations, and bad friends. What if friends are a location that related to family members? How should we avoid them?
Yeah, that's a bit more challenging. You just do the best you can to try to gently turn it towards the wholesome. So the thing I mentioned earlier about enduring when other people say rude things to you and then saying something nice, that actually works really well with family members. If you have poisonous patterns with your family members, try to break those poisonous patterns and cultivate wholesome patterns. If your family habitually engages in unwholesome things, like maybe whenever you're around them, they're always trying to get you to drink alcohol, then you can actually just gently tell them. You can tell them like, I've made a commitment to not drink alcohol, and it makes me really uncomfortable when you try to make me drink. And if you keep trying to make me drink, then I can't spend as much time with you. And you can even say, like, I really want to spend time with you. I really want to have a healthy, wholesome, loving relationship with you. But this particular aspect of how we relate is making it hard for me. So if you put it in a very loving, kind, thoughtful way, then that can make an impact on people. But if you try these things and it's really not working, and your relationship with your family is still harmful, then sometimes you actually do have to pull back a little bit, put a little more distance, interact with them a little bit less often. Sometimes that really is the best option. Okay.
Thank you. And Sally also says, Bhante mentioned at the end, secluded, feel alone in the mind containment. Did I hear them correctly? How to practice this feel alone in the mind? I think I'm always into the story deeply.
Yeah, so this is something which it actually tends to develop to some degree naturally in one's meditation practice. You start to get a feeling of being stable and content within your own experience. And you start to lose this feeling that you need to be involved in what's going on around you. And as you become more comfortable with being present in your own mind, then you also recognize the stability that can be found there, the serenity that can be found in your own mind. So to some degree, this is something which you develop through your Buddhist practice. So as you develop your meditation practice in particular, then it gets easier to cultivate this contentment with being within your own mind, not getting wrapped up in the activities and people around you. Okay.
Thank you. And Elaine has just a comment saying, reference to yesterday's reference to fermentation and today's reference to pets. I rescued a cat and we named him Pickles.
Oh, cute.
When he was a kitten, we called him Gherkin. Long live the fermented. Aw.
Okay, that's adorable.
And that was Stan's comment. Bante, says Mehmet, to follow up yesterday's question about stopping thinking mind, how do you train your mind to repeat 2 tracks at the same time to drown? Can the second track be another activity like attention?
Yeah, actually, attention to the body is one of the most direct ways to cut off thinking. Just focus all your attention on feeling your body. Then there's no room to think. Yeah, so of course that can be an accompaniment to a mental repetition. In fact, I recommend it. In fact, I recommend you should be paying attention to your body all day long, from the moment you wake up until the moment you fall asleep at night. Always, always, always keep your attention firmly fixed on your body. And the moment you notice any unnecessary thinking starting to arise, stop. Come back to the body. No hesitation. And if you need a little more force, then you also use a repetition. But without dropping the awareness of the body, because the awareness of the body keeps you firmly grounded in the present moment. And in the present moment, there's no time to think. There's only time to feel the present moment. Okay?
And Mehmet also adds, what do you do in your mind while you're writing something or studying something? Are you letting your mind to think or repeat specific words at all times?
Well, there are times when you do need to use your thinking mind. So, for example, while reading or studying, you do need to think a little bit. But in that case, then you think only what's directly relevant to what you're doing. So not just letting the mind wander all over the place, but rather keeping your thinking contained within boundaries. So if you're reading a Dharma book, then that's not the time to think about movies and celebrities and so on. That's just the time to think about the Dharma. And try also to keep it contained within the subject that's in front of you. So putting boundaries around the thinking activities and not straying outside those boundaries.
Thank you, Bante. And Ki says, when we're told to avoid bad friends, are we being judgmental? Most people have both good and bad characteristics in them. How much bad is too bad that we need to avoid so we don't have 0 friends?
Yeah, that's a judgment call. It's a judgment call you have to make. Of course, optimally, all your friends would be arhats, and you would only have arhats for friends. But realistically, that's a little bit hard to pull off. So instead, try to spend time with friends who nourish your good qualities and weaken your bad qualities. And as to where to draw the line, well, that's something that you have to figure out for yourself. You have to reflect for yourself what is supportive to my practice and what is not. So if you try to only have saints for friends, then yeah, you'll have no friends, or very, very few, if any. But instead, try to have people who are pretty good. And most importantly, people who support your practice, who encourage you in your development of morality, samadhi, and wisdom. Okay?
Thank you. And Sally says, sorry, my English for understanding containment is limited. What does containment mean? Or it's contained or contented?
Oh, like contained within your own mind. So not getting wrapped up in other people's business, not getting wrapped up in other people's activities or other people's emotions. You can be aware of these things, but you don't get absorbed into them. You don't get obsessed with them. You don't get involved in them. That's what I mean by containment.
Right. And that was the last question, unless one other appears last minute. Well, thank you so much, Bante, for sharing the Dharma, as usual. We will be meeting again with Bante this evening at 7:30 p.m. for meditation and another Dharma talk and discussion. And
She
then
never lets me rest.
no, you will be resting this weekend
Sort of.
morning, the morning part. And tomorrow, actually, there's also a conference happening worldwide with a lot of different monastics, and apparently we will be participating too. And I believe there will be a live stream happening at 9 a.m. Not on our YouTube channel, but on Dhammanet channels. So I'm going to put maybe dhammanet.com, is it, Bante? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I'm checking right now.
Okay.
Dhammanet.org, it looks like.
Dhammanet.org. Okay. So on Dhammanet.org, there is a conference with many monastics happening from Friday to Sunday. And Ki is actually, I believe, part of the group organizing it, or definitely he has a lot of information about it. So Ki, is it correct that it's happening from Friday to Sunday? If you can insert the sort of kind of information on the live chat, that would be great. But I know for sure that Bante and I will be online at a certain point at 9 a.m. On the Dhammanet YouTube session. So it will be right after the Sutta study. So it will be a busy morning tomorrow. And this weekend, we have a special guest star that is actually a special monk star, Bhante Jayasara, who will be leading mindfulness of death on Saturday morning and on Sunday morning. And then we'll have a monk chat in the evening at 7:30 p.m. So if you have any questions, you can bring them up all on Saturday and Sunday. Okay, great. So people can check about the conference on dhammanet.org. So there's and Sally's asking, do we still have class tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? Yes, there will be. And I think Drew is asking, Bhante, using the 4 foundations of mindfulness, trying to observe, understand all phenomena, including the unwholesome and the wholesome. Is this a good method for sense guard training?
Yeah, it helps a lot because you have to be aware of what's going on in your mind before you can know what to restrain, what to change, or what to continue in. So yeah, you have to start with that clear awareness. And also the tools that the Buddha talks about in the Satipatthana Sutta, the perception of impermanence, practicing non-attachment and letting go. These are things which are directly helpful to developing sense restraint and so on. Yeah.
Great. All right. And good to see also Danga online. All right. Well, thank you so much once again for spending time with us, learning the teachings of the Buddha. This is such a great way to invest the time of our day, and it's great to do it together. And Ella is also saying it feels great to practice with all of you. Yes, I second that. It's true. All right. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a great